Hey everyone, I asked you all to leave some questions on my Facebook page and on my Instagram account, and I said that I would make a video with some of the answers. So this is the video. There were some great questions. Some people want to know about the protagonist in my new novel, and some people want to know when I'm going to quit my day job to write full time. So stay tuned for the answers. I'm Jack Arbour. I'm the best-selling author of the Russian assassin thriller series. I have a new book coming out at the end of December. It's called The Japanese Assassin, and it's kicking off a brand new series with a brand new set of characters and a brand new protagonist. Let's get into the Q&A. Question number 1. What made you start writing? Okay, so this is a great question, and this is a very different question than what keeps me writing. But anyway, maybe that's a question for another time. When I was growing up, we didn't have a television. I spent a lot of time reading. I read, when I was younger, Encyclopedia Brown and the Hardy Boys were some of my early fiction. I got into fantasy pretty quickly with Lord of the Rings, The Sword of Shannara. Then I started to get into Stephen King and started to read thrillers by Ken Follett. And most of those books and most of those authors are excellent. But I also read a lot of books that were not all that great. And when you start to read books that aren't that great, you start to think to yourself, man, I can do this. I can write a better book than this. And the creative process starts to flow. You start to get this little inkling in your head that, you could write a novel. And when that starts to go, then that's what triggered the first idea that maybe I could be a writer. And, that was fairly early on. It took me a long time to get to the point where I gave myself permission to do it. The second thing that happened is that I stumbled across Joanna Penn, and this was maybe 10 years ago. And Joanna, as you probably know, is a blogger, a podcaster in the independent publishing industry. I'd always wanted to start a business and to create my own business. And when I started to listen to Joanna Penn, I realized that I could not only start my own business, i.e. an independent publishing business, but that I could also write fiction and that I could publish myself. And when I started to realize that those two things clicked, i.e. the idea of writing fiction that I'd always wanted to do, and that I could do it as a business myself. And when those two things came together, that's really what got me going as an author. And again, that was 8, 9, 10 years ago. Question number 2. Where does your inspiration for character development come from? I love this question. I spend far more time on character development than I do on plotting or on research or storylines. To me, the character development is the most important part of what I do. I really think that readers pick up books in order to, get to know the characters, follow along with the characters, root for the characters, get scared for the characters. It's really those emotions that I think are the most important thing. So what I do is that I try to bring together a couple of unique aspects of a character's background or character traits that, when combined together, make for something unique or challenging that the character has to either get through or think about or grow from or evolve from. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So Max's background is that he was born in Minsk, part of the Soviet Union. He grew up as a spy in the KGB system. And then when he was an adult, he was shipped to the West as a sleeper agent. And so the dichotomy or the contextual difference of growing up in the Soviet Union, but then also living in the West, having those two things come together then creates a unique character aspect of Max, because he has the background of the Soviet Union, but also has lived in the West and has those influences. And he has to try to navigate through those polarities of his own character. In Cat and Mouse, which is a short novella that I wrote that takes place before all of the different things that happen in the Russian Assassin series, I put Max in a situation where, as a agent and an assassin who has to tightly control his his friends and his family and his back, the people around him in order to keep himself safe. I had to make it so that he ultimately had to make a decision to work with someone who he had to implicitly trust in order to get the job done. And so those two dichotomies or contextual differences also then led to some character growth on Max's part. And so what I try to do is I try to put two things together that are very unique and different, maybe polar opposites, and then put a character in the situation where they have to deal with both of those, which I think you would agree is generally what happens in real life. Question number 3. Where did you come up with the idea for the Max Austin series, and how much of the overall story arc did you have in mind when you began writing? So that's a 2-part question. Coming up with the idea for the Max Austin series, at the time, there were a lot of thriller novels and stories being written about terrorism taking place in the Middle East, and I wanted to do something different than that. I grew up a child of the Cold War. I'm a Generation Xer, and we grew up thinking about nuclear war. We grew up with tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. We grew up as children of the Reagan sort of administration, and I also was born in Japan while my father was stationed there for the Vietnam War. So with a lot of that kind of background in my childhood and in growing up, I thought it would be a great idea to write something where to kind of rekindle those tensions. And believe me when I say that I had zero idea what was going to be happening with NATO, between NATO and Russia, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the tragic war that is happening between Russia and Ukraine. I obviously had no idea that was going to become a thing when I set out to write this series. I really just wanted an anti-hero. I wanted someone who had the conflicts of growing up in the Soviet Union, but then also living a significant part of his adult life in the West, and to explore some of the tensions and character development that would come along with that, and to explore some storylines and that could have come from Max's father having been such a key part of the Cold War. And so that's where some of those story ideas came from. The second part of the question, how much of the overall story arc did you have in mind when you began writing? That's a great question. I wish that I had intricately plotted the entire 6-book series before I started. Trust me when I say that it would have been a lot easier to write the 6 novels. They would have been written a lot quicker. But unfortunately, it was more like an archaeological dig. And I think Stephen King has used that metaphor before, where you start out and you sort of brush away some of the sand and you discover the fossil underneath, and then you keep brushing away sand until the story appears. I did spend a lot of time outlining, but the story itself unfolded as I wrote it. I find in the plotting and pantsing debate, I try to straddle the two. I find that I'm more creative when I'm writing, but I also find that I'm more efficient when I'm plotting and outlining. So I try to straddle the two, but ultimately the full 6 novels, the whole story arc of the Russian assassin, came out a little bit at a time in sort of an archaeological style, as opposed to plotting it out all ahead of time. Next question. I think this is question 4. If you quit drinking bourbon, what replaced it and why? This came from my old friend Jenny. I am a member of a club that you do not want to be in, and that is called Club Gout. And I just discovered this back in 2021. My wife and I were in Asheville, North Carolina. We were on a brew pub tour, If you know anything about Asheville, they have some amazing breweries. And after visiting 4 or 5 of the breweries in Asheville, went to bed, woke up in the middle of the night, and my toe was absolutely killing me. So, of course, I got on the Googles, and one thing led to another, and I deduced for myself that I suffer from gout, which is a little bit odd because I have a very healthy lifestyle, and I don't drink to excess. I don't eat red meat. My wife is vegan, which makes me vegan-ish. She hates it when I say that. But in general, my diet is very good. So it's a little odd to find out that I have gout. But anyway, alcohol, in particular, bourbon and beer, exacerbate the gout to a degree where it's just not worth it. What I've replaced it with, I think that was part of the question. What replaced it and why? After some research, it became clear that sake and beer brewed in the East, in other words, Japan, China, Thailand, tend to have less of the product, it's called purines, which is what causes gout. The purines build up in your body, and then they create these crystals in your joints that become very painful. And beer that is brewed in Japan or Thailand or China has a lot less purines in it, and so does sake. So I have essentially replaced my bourbon and most of my beer with sake and Asian beer. And I like both of those, and it's great, so all fine. And by the way, these days I don't drink all that much. I find that if I drink less, that my sleep is better, and that when my sleep is better, I'm a better creative, and I get more production done, and I can write more. So I think that cycle of productivity is way better when I drink less. So, next question. Have you been to Belarus and Russia before writing about Max and his family? I have traveled extensively. My wife is a travel agent, as most of you probably know. And we've been through Asia and through Europe, through Central America, Mexico, and we're very fortunate to have, be so well traveled. However, I have never been to Russia or Minsk or Belarus. They're high on my list, but I feel like maybe I lost my window of opportunity, at least in the short term here. When I was writing the first few books of the Russian Assassin series, a friend of mine from college lived and worked in Moscow, and he was very helpful when it came to researching those scenes and the characters and the family and so on. But you'll also notice that I don't spend a lot of time, or I should say Max and his family don't spend a lot of time in Russia. I didn't intend it to be an Eastern novel. I didn't intend it to be a Russian novel or to be steeped in that sort of culture. I intended it very much to be a Western novel, and which is why I took Max out of that geographical location and put him into Europe, into Western Europe pretty quickly. I wanted it to be accessible to Western readers. I didn't want to dwell on it being in the East, and so for that reason, I didn't think that I thought that the research that I did was fair, and I thought it represented Max and his family in a good way. My next series takes place in Japan and Hong Kong, and will eventually foray into North Korea and probably South Korea. As I mentioned before, I was born in Japan. I've traveled extensively in Japan. I've been to Hong Kong. I love that region of the world. I lived in India for a while. I've been to Singapore. And for me, writing stories and characters that are in that geographical location is very satisfying. And I love researching and traveling to that part of the world. So I think, I probably won't travel to North Korea. I think I'll probably steer clear of that, but there's plenty of ways to research and to represent what life is truly like in North Korea through many of the research materials that are available. And in fact, there's a book I can recommend called The Orphan Master's Son by Adam Johnson. The book won a Pulitzer Prize in 2013, and it takes place in North Korea with North Korean characters, and it is excellent. Highly, highly recommended. Next question. What is your day job, and how do you fit writing into your life? This is something that I think about daily, and if I'm being honest, I struggle with daily. My day job, so to answer the question, my day job is in technology. I am a technology executive in the ski industry, which I consider to be, I'm very lucky to have had the opportunity to be a technologist, which is something that is my trade, that I'm trained in, that I've been doing for 20 plus years, that I like and that I enjoy, with an activity and an industry that I truly love. So I feel very, very fortunate to have built a career in an industry that I truly enjoy. That being said, I'm a writer and I love writing. Keeping my day job while I'm writing affords me an opportunity to learn the craft of writing without the pressure of having to produce work on a regular basis. Keeping my day job allows me to experiment with my writing and potentially take risks in stories that I might not otherwise take risks in. It prevents me from, or it allows me to not have to, quote, write to market in order to, make an income to pay the mortgage or put food on the table. It's funny, I was just listening to a podcast by Mel Robbins who was talking about the idea of whether you should quit your day job to start a business or whether you should start a business while you're doing your day job. And she walked through some research that is very clear that if you keep your day job while you're building your side hustle, that you're more inclined to be successful over the long term. And for me, given the fact that I love my job and I love the people that I work with, I love the industry that I'm in, and I love writing, that to me, the balance of those two is sort of perfect. Now, eventually I will get to the point where I want to write and, be a writer, be an independent writer, but I'm just not quite to that point yet. The second part was, how do you fit writing into your life? First of all, I highly recommend having a very supportive spouse. My wife she's my biggest fan, was my first fan, and she gives me the space to do the writing, which I'm very grateful for. I also, when you're a writer, and if you're a writer and you're watching this, you know what I'm saying, that writers write, and you can't really not write. So it's easy for me to find time on weekends and evenings. When it's a powder day, that's a little more difficult, not going to lie. But writers write, and it's easy for me to find time to write and then put off things like doing laundry or shoveling the driveway or whatever. It just makes it super easy. So I'm very fortunate to have such a supportive spouse. And sometimes, not going to lie, it's a bit of a struggle, but I think I'm doing pretty good with the balance. Okay, next question. What is an Oxford comma? And then there's the second part of the question, which is, am I mistaken in thinking the Oxford comma used to also appear after and? Let me address the second part of the question first, which is no. Okay, so what is an Oxford comma? This question is going to get into some nerdy writing stuff, so bear with me, but it's kind of fun. So an Oxford comma is the comma that appears after the second word in a series of three items. It's also known as the serial comma, and it comes before the conjunction and after the second item in the list. So in this example, Max walked into the convenience store and purchased some vodka, cigarettes, and beef jerky. The Oxford comma is the one after the word cigarettes and before the word and. So that's what the Oxford or the serial comma is. The reason why it's so important is because it helps prevent ambiguity and confusion. And I'll give you an example. And I'm going to read from my list here. So in this sentence, I love my parents Lady Gaga and Dr. Dre. So there's two ways to interpret that sentence. One is, I love my parents, Lady Gaga, comma, and Dr. Dre. Right, so the Oxford comma is the one after Lady Gaga. If you leave out the Oxford comma, and if you say, oh, we don't need the serial comma, and you leave that out, then you love your parents, and you could interpret the person saying this to say, my parents are Lady Gaga and Dr. Dre, which is probably unlikely. I mean, I guess it's possible, but it seems unlikely. And so the reason for the Oxford comma is to put it in there to create and to eliminate ambiguity. Now, the argument against the Oxford comma, which some people like to make, is that it's unnecessary and that readers will know what you mean without the Oxford comma. The only real argument for leaving out the Oxford comma stems back to the early 1900s when printing presses were used, and the publishers or the printers needed all the space that they could manage to get a line, to fit into the document that they're printing. And if they left, and sometimes they might want to leave out a comma in order to have more space. Now, in today's world of digital publishing and word processing, that argument is moot these days. And so there's really no argument to not ever use the Oxford comma. Next question. How many books will be in the Max Austin series? Does it take you longer to write if you are still working another job? So there are 6 books in the Russian Assassin series. That series is complete. There will not be another book in the Russian Assassin series. And the reason for that is that the 6 books are one long story arc. So I highly recommend that you read those books in order, starting with The Russian Assassin and ending with Endgame. The story arc of Max and his father and everything that goes on in the Asimov family takes place over those 6 books, and you're best served to read them in order. That's sort of similar to The Lord of the Rings, by the way, and the story of the ring and its journey from the Shire to Mordor takes place over 6 books. Not many people know this. There's 3 volumes in The Lord of the Rings, but there's also 6 books, 2 books in each volume. So anyway, highly recommend that you read the Russian Assassin series in order. My next series, The Japanese Assassin, will not have that requirement. Every book in that series will be a standalone story. The story arc, there may be some character story arcs. There's going to be some consistent themes and some consistent, character development that are going to go from novel to novel. But each story in the Japanese Assassin series will be a standalone. Let's see, what was the next part of the question? Oh, does it take you longer to write if you are still working another job? The answer is absolutely yes. My long-term goal is to increase my production. Right now, I am at about a book a year, 1 novel per year. I would like to quadruple that eventually. And in order to do that, it will require me to leave my day job and write full-time. And that is known in the business as foreshadowing. Next question. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live and why? It's funny, I was just talking about this topic with a friend of mine recently. And, right now Jill and I live outside of Aspen, Colorado, which is a pretty special place and is very difficult to beat. I also grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I still have friends and family there. And as we all get older, my family, living and spending more time with family in Ann Arbor is an attractive idea. If money were no object, then Jill and I would have a pied-à-terre in a big city like New York or London. We absolutely love both of those cities, and we travel there whenever we can. And it would be super fun to have a little place where we could go. I could do some writing. We could explore cities. And so that's kind of fits into the if I could wave a magic wand bucket. I would also love to travel around city to city, month by month, and do some writing in cities like Oslo or Buenos Aires or Mexico City, and stay in an Airbnb or something of that nature for a month and be able to write and explore. So I think those are on our wish list, but things like family and community, health, sunshine, going uphill on skis, those things are super important to me and to Jill. And so probably Colorado will remain our main residency or our main state of residency for the rest of the foreseeable future. We're very fortunate to be able to live here, and to give that up is very difficult. Next question. Hey, Jack, when will you quit your day job to write full time? This is a loaded question from my career coach. The short answer is that I'll quit my day job to write full time when the economics make sense. The longer answer is that it's always been a dream of mine to be a full-time writer, to have my own independence and not rely on a paycheck, and generate my own income and create what I think of as lifestyle independence. Life exists in seasons, or I should say life progresses in seasons. And I can sense my current season starting to wane, which means that the next season, which I really view as becoming a full-time writer, is a lot closer now than it used to be. And I'll just leave it at that. Next question. How do you think AI is going to affect the writing process? This is a big topic. We probably don't have enough time to get into it here. I should probably make a video on this topic all by itself. I'll put that on my to-do list because it is important. I think AI is, as a technologist, I think AI is an important set of technology. It's an important advancement. It's going to be beneficial to society. But I also think that we collectively need to put more guardrails around AI. I heard an interview with Elon Musk where he talked about the fact that for him to launch a rocket into space, he had to get sign off on some 3,000 different rules and regulations that, governed the ability to launch a rocket, which seems right. But that for him to launch an AI application, that he had to do none of that. And that seems wrong. I think there's a lot of work to do from an overall macro level standpoint around AI governance, and that I think we should proceed cautiously as a society. As far as how it's going to affect the writing process, it already has. So we're already there. I do use AI in a limited fashion in my writing, and think of it as a glorified, or I shouldn't say glorified, but a more advanced Google functionality to help me with things like research. And that's largely how I personally use it. I can assure you that AI is not being used to write any of my prose. Now, I may use it a little bit more to help me with marketing copy. I hate writing marketing copy. And I'm finding it useful to help me in the marketing copy. So the blurbs or copy that I'm using to market my books, those kinds of things. And I think, that's totally fine. I am a big fan though, of the idea that art or the creative process, even creating a video or creating a work of, any kind of creative work, whether it's a novel or a short story or a blog post or something of that fashion, that should be human generated. Like, I feel very strongly about that. Now, can AI or should AI be used to help with the research process or help with the content? Maybe. But again, my view is that the production of content should be a human endeavor. And I will likely always use AI to help with that, but that I will always be the primary generator of the work of, content or the novel or the video or whatever it is that I'm making. So anyway, big topic, and maybe I'll make a video on that one all by itself at some point later. Last question, and this one's my favorite one. Tell us about the protagonist in your new novel. Well, I'm glad you asked. Her name is Kira Nomura. She was a supporting character in the Russian Assassin book 4 called The Hunt. That was the title of the book, The Hunt. She was a supporting character there. And then she had a cameo role in book 6, and in book 6 in Endgame, I was trying to get as many characters in there as I could to kind of wrap up the series. But anyway, so she had a cameo appearance in that book. And since I wrote her character in book 4, I really wanted to explore her and use her as a way to explore themes and storylines in a different region of the world. And so the Japanese assassin was born. Book 1 is her origin story, which is how she became an assassin and how she ended up being recruited into a very clandestine and top secret agency within the Japanese government. And I don't want to give away too much of her character because book 1 was crafted very carefully to reveal bits and pieces of her character and who she is as we go along. So I don't want to ruin that for anybody who might want to read the book. So the Russian, I'm probably going to do that a lot. The Japanese assassin will be available at the end of December. So watch this space. And that's the end of the question. That's the end of the Q&A. So thank you very much for making it this far along through the video. If you made it this far and you enjoyed this content, please give the video a thumbs up. It'll really help me out. It's not like I'm creating a lot of videos, but it helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you want to see more of this content on a regular basis, please go ahead and subscribe. And you can follow along with the videos that I make on a periodic basis as we go. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Crap, I was on a roll. So we're gonna get into a little bit of some nerdy righty stuff here. Nerdy righty stuff? Come on, man. Nerdy righty stuff.